Canadian negotiators have remained in Washington this weekend in what has turned into a last-second bid to try and find a trade deal with the Americans that would avoid new tariffs coming into place on August 19th. Our Mackenzie Gray has been following the talks, and he joins us now from our parliamentary bureau. So, Mac, what is the state of play of these negotiations?
Well, they're not going very well right now, according to a number of sources that we've spoken with. Publicly, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, who's the main negotiator for the Americans, has said it's been constructive and cordial with the Canadians, but also says that the Americans are not going to stand for the retaliation that Canada has had. One of the things we hear from him consistently is that Canada and China are the only two countries that have retaliated against the Americans in the trade war that they've launched against Canada and pretty much all other countries in the world. A number of sources that we've spoken with say that while the talks have been constructive, there is a major gap between both sides. One of the key issues, in particular in British Columbia, is softwood lumber. Sources have told us that the Americans are not willing to move on that. Of course, softwood has been a long-standing issue that Democrat and Republican presidents at different points in time have really pushed forward. There have long been tariffs or countervailing duties on softwood. So that seems to be a very, very challenging issue. Right now, there's multiple duties and tariffs that are on softwood. That's at about 45% tariffs right now. So that's a major issue, not only in BC, but in places like New Brunswick and a lot of other lumber-producing provinces as well, too. On autos, steel, and aluminum, the other three sectors that are at play here, what we've heard from sources is that the Americans are only going to accept a deal in this situation if there is some level of tariff on those different goods. The Canadian side will only accept an agreement if tariffs come down substantially. So the question is, how low can the tariffs go in this situation? As it stands now, it does not sound like the Americans are willing to go low enough to get to a place that the Canadians are willing to actually sign an agreement. What will Canada have to give up if an agreement is actually signed? Well, number one, the key thing for the Americans certainly is getting U.S. alcohol back on provincial liquor store shelves. We have heard some premiers say that they're open to doing that as long as the sectors that are important in their province get lots of help in this situation. We'll have to see how that plays out. One of the other things is dairy quotas. The way dairy works right now, the Americans are allowed to import a certain percentage of dairy into Canada, and then within that percentage, there are certain different things for stuff like milk, cheese, cream, other examples in the dairy sector. Those are very strictly limited right now. The Americans want to change that to make it easier for American producers to have really more choice in terms of what they send into Canada as well, too. The way it's been put to me by sources that this is, in the Prime Minister's eyes, a preference for him to get a deal right now, but it would also be step one of a three-step program. Step one, get a deal now on sectoral tariffs, avoid tariffs that are scheduled to come in on Wednesday, 50% on $28 billion worth of goods. Okay, if you can get a deal here, you move on to step two, which is partner with the Americans on a number of different things, signing deals on things like energy and defense. And then step three, move into those CUSMA negotiations and stronger footing with a bit more certainty in that situation. It seems like step one right now probably isn't going to happen. There is some time, but we'll have to see how things play out over the coming days and if those tariffs actually do come into place as they are signed to on August 19th.
And Mac, while it is the Carney government leading negotiations, what role do the provinces have in the talks?
Well, it is the provinces that make the decision on whether or not alcohol goes back on those provincial shelves. Really, in BC right now, that's the province I'm looking at the most. If there is no movement on softwood lumber, I think it is going to be very challenging for BC Premier David Eby to put alcohol back onto the shelves in BC. If there are some provinces that don't do it, but other provinces that do, is that enough for the Americans to actually be okay with things? It's important to remember that the LCBO here in Ontario is the largest buyer of alcohol in the world. They have previously bought, when they were buying U.S. Alcohol, spirits, wine, beer, they're buying a lot of that stuff. So is it good enough just to have Ontario and Quebec on side as an example, but BC not on side? I don't know if the Americans would be willing to accept that. We'll have to see how things play out. But if there is no movement for softwood lumber, what can Mark Carney do to induce the BC Premier to put booze back on the shelves if there is the key part of a deal, which it certainly seems like it would be? And is that politically viable for the BC NDP to actually do that in order to get the movement forward that they would require to have something that's been a long-standing issue and one of the key leverage points that the Canadian government has? So in terms of the provinces, it's really what happens with alcohol. And we've heard from the Quebec Premier, Doug Ford in Ontario, saying, hey, they're open to doing this as long as their sectors get help. Autos is another key thing that is very interesting to watch in this situation. There's been an American proposal, according to sources that we've spoken with, that say they want to have tariffs on CUSMA compliant, so free trade compliant cars and parts at around either 10 to 15%. Industry insiders that we have spoken with would be very unhappy with that proposal. The automakers have also talked with Reuters. They say that they are not happy with that kind of proposal too. Can Doug Ford get on side with something like that and put booze back on the shelves in the LCBO? A lot of moving parts there, and the premiers really do have an important role to play in this and have leverage not only the Americans but also the Prime Minister and the time and the kind of deal that Mark Carney could actually sign in this situation.
So, Mac, if there is no deal by Wednesday, which is the deadline for those new tariffs, what is the next play for the Canadian government?
Well, the first play for the American government, let's see if they actually follow through on those August 19th tariffs that have been signed into place. You know, we have seen the president on a number of occasions on all kinds of different deals, but particularly with Canadian tariffs at certain points in time, either threaten them and not bring them in, or have signed documents like he has in this situation, and then either not have them come into place on the day that they're supposed to, or have them come in for a couple of days and then they go away. So, you know, the 19th is the deadline that Trump has set, but we have lots of examples of him going back on deadlines or changing things, sometimes for the worse. You know, it could actually be even more things with tariffs that come into place there. We should point out, though, that this has kind of been a more formal process. These August 19th tariffs that the Americans are bringing into place, these aren't things that Donald Trump has just, you know, posted on Truth Social and then are going to come into force. They have kind of followed the rules in terms of how they have to do things to bring tariffs into place. From the Canadian perspective, if there's not a deal, you know, we've heard from a number of members of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Canada-U.S. trade that there is going to be some kind of retaliation. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in that situation. You'll remember back to last summer, there were a whole bunch of counter tariffs that the Prime Minister talked a lot about during the election campaign that he dropped basically unilaterally. And what was the rationale from him? Well, he said that he had a deal from Donald Trump written in paper that they were not going to put tariffs on things that are CUSMA compliant, that carve out that has been in place for Canada for things that were not involved in the original set of tariffs was going to be the place. Well, that's not the case anymore. The Americans have put more tariffs into place. These tariffs are going to apply to things that are CUSMA compliant. We should point out that about 80% of goods that are trade between Canada and the U.S. will still go tariff-free, so a large section of the Canadian economy that relies on trade will still be okay here. But what is Mark Carney willing to do to go forward? Does he go back to elbows up Mark Carney that we saw during the election that's much more aggressive against Donald Trump? A lot of that talk basically died the day after the election. Does that get revived in this situation? A lot of polls show that Canadians are willing to do that. I think that is the mood of the premiers in many situations too. So it'll be very interesting to see what cards Mark Carney plays. If you talk to a lot of economists, they say counter tariffs, that's a negative thing for the Canadian economy. It's shooting yourself in the foot. Mark Carney, of course, he's an economist. He's got his PhD in economics. Does he follow through with that, or does he follow through maybe on some political instincts that say, I've got to push back against Donald Trump. We've had too many hits, too many new tariffs that come into place. If there is no deal, it'll be very interesting to see the approach that Mark Carney takes in this situation. One thing he has said, though, is that he doesn't want to put any tariffs on energy. I know for a fact that there are many people on his advisory council from the business community that say, you know what, that should be something he should consider. Let's see how things play out over the next couple of days.
All right, that is our Mackenzie Gray reporting in Ottawa. Thanks for the breakdown, Mac.